Good morning. And first, thank you for inviting me to speak to your group this morning. As Paula said, I lived in Jerusalem for 14 years and I returned about a year and a half ago. When I was there, I worked both as a tour guide and as an archaeologist. And so I collected a lot of miscellaneous information that can provide really interesting, I think interesting programs for people. So what I want to speak about today is life in Jerusalem from 37 BCE until about the year 70. In Jewish terms, this will be called the late Second Temple period, meaning from the time that King Herod came to the throne and began to rebuild or renovate the Second Temple until the temple was destroyed in the year 70. For Christians, this totally encompasses Jesus' lifetime. So Jesus' lifetime from 0 to 33 lands right in the middle of this time block. So you'll see what kind of things he would have seen there in Jerusalem. First, I want to talk about the growth of Jerusalem. We'll start on the left. From the time of David and Solomon, Jerusalem was on a hilltop that was actually south of where the old city of Jerusalem is today, or if you've seen pictures of the old city. And then later on, it spread up to encompass the Temple Mount up on the hilltop. Later on, by the year 37, when King Herod came to the throne, the city had expanded quite a bit out towards the west with huge residential areas. There was a part called the Upper City and another section called the Lower City. And yes, one is higher than the other. The Upper City, when you left the Temple Mount, you'd be walking uphill in order to get to the Upper City, and you'd be walking downhill to get to the Lower City. There was a wall around the city. At that time, it was not called the First Wall. That's how we refer to it today. By the time of 30, which would be during Jesus' lifetime, the city had spread considerably to the north and to the west. And then you had something that we now refer to as the Second Wall that encompassed the city. And the First Wall still was around the southern part of it. The Upper City now is sort of in the middle of the whole metropolitan area. The Lower City is way down at the lower end of it. And by the year 70, which was at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, the city has expanded considerably, again, to the north and to the west, to an area that is referred to as the Third Wall. The Temple Mount was at its maximum size, and this is the maximum size that the city reached during ancient times. Also, probably the maximum population that it had was during this time and with these outer borders to it. If we look at the city of Jerusalem today, if you've been to Jerusalem or you've seen pictures of Jerusalem with the wall around what's called the Old City, this red line here is where that wall is. So you can tell that the city in the year 70 was considerably larger, in fact, more than double the size of what this walled city is today, especially have this huge area in the north, a whole area in the south. And where the ancient city walls are today does not encompass what we were calling the Lower City at all, nor does it encompass what was David's and Jerusalem's, David and Solomon's Jerusalem, which is on this ridge line down here to the south. If we look at a map of the city of Jerusalem today, this is one that was put up by National Geographic in 1996. It's a nice map and still applies. You can see how the city is divided into 4 quarters. They've marked the Armenian quarter, it's a Christian population here, with yellow buildings. Here's the Jewish quarter with the blue buildings, the Muslim quarter with the green buildings, and the Christian quarter with the red buildings. And here in the southeast, we have the Temple Mount. The information that we have about this time period comes from 3 major excavations. The first excavation was done from 1969 until 1982 by Nachman Avigad, and it encompassed a lot of the upper part of the Jewish quarter, including what we called in ancient times here the Upper City. Simultaneously, another excavation was going on that was called Temple Mount excavations. That excavation was not on the Temple Mount, but rather to the west and to the south of it. It was being carried on by Benjamin Bazar. This is from 1986 until 1970. 1968 until 1978. It was carried on by Benjamin Mazar, and then later on, Benjamin Mazar's granddaughter, Eilat Mazar, continued working in the southern area, and she carried on this work until we got shut down by COVID in the year 2020, and unfortunately, she passed away in 2021. So the work is being carried on in that area today. It's being done by Hebrew University, and Eilat Mazar is sorely missed. The third set of excavations are what's called the Step Street excavations. And this is an area that goes south from the wall part of the city. It was begun around 2008 and continues to the present. This is in the City of David National Park, or sponsored by the City of David National Park. Originally started under the leadership of Ronnie Reich and Eli Shukran, later on by Joe Uziel, and then Nachshon Zanton and Moran Hajbi, and now it's under Ari Levy. I have worked with all these guys except for Ronnie Reich. I know Ronnie, I just have never really worked with him very much, but the other archaeologists, I worked extensively with them over the 14 years that I was there. So we're going to take a look at what was revealed in these excavations and help us to understand the city during this time period a little bit better. During the Jordanian period, when the Jordanians had taken over the old city, this is from 1948 until 1967, they totally destroyed every building in the Jewish quarter. Now, the Armenian quarter remained fine, the Christian quarter was fine, the Muslim quarter was fine, Temple Mount was fine. It was only the Jewish quarter that was destroyed. Once the Jews were able to come back in 1967, they made the decision that before they built up, they would dig down. And so you can see part of an excavation here. You can see the gentleman over here standing on the level ground and going down in, and they were finding stone courtyards and stone flooring, a beautiful mosaic floor. We'll actually see this mosaic floor again later. Both of these pictures are taken basically at the same angle, and the star that I put in both pictures is the southwest corner of the Temple Mount, the upper southwest corner. So you can tell it's sort of taken in, at the same angle. The one on the right was taken a little bit more farther distant back. One of the things they discovered was that Jerusalem was laid out like a typical Roman city, because at the time it was under Roman authority. The northwest streets are each called a cardo, the plural is cardines, and east-west streets are called a decumanus, and plural of decumani. When they began digging in the old city, especially in the upper cardo, they were hoping to find part of the cardo, but they didn't really realize what they were actually going to uncover. And they uncovered a tremendous amount of information. Here we have the ancient cardo. Both of these pictures are in the cardo today. Part of it is an open air section, part of it is partially roofed over. You can see here the ancient street stones. Now you can tell here they put in some modern ones along here, but all these rough stones, these are the ones that are 2,000 years old. The same with the ones in the right picture. On either side of the road, remember here, what you're looking at is sort of down the middle of the street. This is the western side of the street. There's a whole eastern side of the street that looks just like this. There's a wide sidewalk that's going down the road, and then there are shops along the side. From ruins that were left on the side, they realized there were arched shops that went all along the side of the street. And over top of this sidewalk was a roof covering. They found columns in the area. A lot of them were broken. They brought in some ones from other parts of the city in order to rebuild this. But what they found were the beam slots in the back wall. So they could tell that the beams went across and were held up by the columns. And then there was a roof over top of all of these sidewalks on both sides of the street. Now, when you look down the street here, you will see what looks like blue sky. Well, actually what this is at the far end is a mural to give you an idea of what this would have looked like. So here's the street in the middle. You've got sidewalks on both sides, columns with a roof over top of the sidewalks on both sides. And here's all your little shops. This guy here is selling, he's selling stone pots. This one's selling some lamps and pots that are hanging from the ceiling. Here you have somebody who's selling fabrics. You have people coming in with their sheep and their goat and their chickens. And this is where all the buying, selling, and trading took place. My favorite part of the picture is right here in the very front, where a little modern boy with his backpack is meeting a little ancient girl right at the edge of the sidewalk right there. But it kind of gives you an idea of what this part of the city would look like during this time. This is the Lower Cardo. These excavations are right beside the Temple Mount. This is the Western Wall. The Western Wall Plaza, where the people go to pray, is just on the other side of this fence over here. But this is part of the Western Wall of the Temple Mount. In fact, right here, you can see part of an archway that led up and over, and you could access the Temple Mount right here. This street was not quite as wide as the other one, and it did not have a big wide sidewalk on the side, but it did have the shops going down both sides of the street. You can see the ones here on the left. These are the original. They have not been rebuilt. This is how they looked when they were found, because this was underneath this archway that allowed you access to go up on the Temple Mount. On the other side, you can see the stone walls going across. So these were the arches to the small shops on this side of the street. The third excavation that I mentioned is the Step Street. Here's the Lower Cardo we just looked at. That was all along the Western Wall. And the Step Street now will continue all the way down to the Siloam Pool at the bottom of the hill. And it's going to go through what we call then the lower city. So here's your upper city up in this direction. Here's your lower city down here. And so the excavations on the Step Street are going through the lower city all the way down to the Siloam Pool at the bottom of the hill. If you've been to Jerusalem and you've been to the City of David National Park, it's in this area right here. In fact, they're the ones that are carrying on all this excavation. The excavation today is continuing, and it's right in this area here. You cannot see it from above. That's because it's all being done underground. This is an area that is presently occupied by lots of people. The majority of them are Muslim Arabs. They are total Israeli citizens, but they would be very upset if the archaeologists went in with bulldozers and started removing all their houses. So the excavation is actually going on underneath all of these homes. The only access that you see is right off the street, where there's a gateway. You go in and you go down a bunch of stairs, and you'll find yourself in the middle of the excavation. And down in here, we have, again, all the ancient stones from the streets. You can see they're beautifully cut, laid, going downhill. So you'll walk a few paces and go down a step, walk a few paces, go down a step, walk a few paces, go down a step. That's where we get this term, the Step Street, because you're going downhill the whole time from north to south. Here's the street. They're uncovering it, or they're trying to uncover it from curbstone to curbstone. Over here, you can see the sidewalk on the side of the street, and then homes here. They've actually extended this excavation in this area, so there's another set of these high arches on the other side. And the homes over here, the first one I know has something. They're trying to decide whether it's a bathing pool or if it is a mikveh, a Jewish ritual cleansing pool in it. And the next building has a huge oven in it, and they think it's a community bakery. A lot of this work is on the digging of this tunnel is being overseen by a Swiss tunneling company. They know how to build tunnels. And so they'll dig a few meters, put up an arch, put up these ceilings to hold up all the buildings that are above it. You don't want them collapsing down on the workers here. This is an air ventilation pipe on the side. And this contraption on the top is a conveyor belt where they hook on bags of material that have been dug out that need to be taken out, or things like this, bags of cement that need to be brought down into the site. And this continues. It will, once it's done, it'll continue from the Temple Mount all the way down to the Siloam Pool at the bottom of the hill. If you turn and look north on the street, you can see the meaning of the Step Street. We'll get to a step, go along, get to another step up, get another step up near. There's several steps up on it. Some places towards the south, a lot of these stones have been removed. They're not sure what happened to them, if they were never there, or more likely they were used for construction centuries later. In fact, in this area here is the Church of the Siloam Pool, which was a Byzantine church. So some of the stones may have been removed and used in that church in like around in the 500s. But they can still follow where the walkway went, goes down. You can see the light at the bottom. This is when you're getting towards the pool at the bottom of the hill. In fact, underneath some of these stones, they found coins from the time of Pontius Pilate. So for Christians, you'll be familiar with the character of Pontius Pilate, who's the procurator of Jerusalem during this time, or of Israel during this time. And some of the coins that were found under there have his picture on them, which means he was the one who was in charge of laying these newest stones that went all the way down the street. There had been a street there for hundreds and hundreds of years, but now they were repaving it with the new larger stones. This is an area at the north where they had stopped at the time. I mean, they're still digging through here, but it was a picture one day to show you how they actually do the work. They came to a cross wall in here that will be removed. So they draw all the pictures of it, take photographs of it, and then they'll start removing this material, go a few meters up, put in another one of these arches, and then put in these steel beams at the top that hold everything up. So it gives you an idea of what all they have to do in this construction process. The first thing we want to look at, though, or another thing we want to look at, are the homes. The homes were built of stone, and many had 2 or more stories. And these stones are ones that were cut into rectangular blocks. Out in the countryside, you'll find houses that were built with just field stones. They wouldn't cut them. But here in the city, they were cut into rectangular blocks. And the archaeologists know that there are at least 2 stories here by the amount of rubble that tumbled down onto the street and what they had to clear off the street. It was way too much rubble to be simply from a 1-story building that had toppled over. So they know they had at least 2 stories. So you'll have upper patios on them. You've got courtyards. This particular part is showing you the step street going up towards the Temple Mount. And here is where that arch was going over to give people access to go up onto the Temple Mount. These are some of the homes that were excavated in the Upper Cardo excavations, the ones by Nachman Avigad. The hill, the house is built on a hill going down this way. So some of the rooms are higher up. You'll go down and get to lower levels. It's like townhouses do now, especially if it's in a hilly area. You go down some stairs towards a lower level. Over here, we have an underground cistern for storing the water from during the rainy season. Then you can go into this room here. You're at a lower level room, and it continues this way on down the hill. Here's 2 diagrams of this house. One showing a lot more of the outside. Here's your street that's coming from the upper west side of the city going down towards the Temple Mount, downhill, downhill, downhill. You've got a large living room. You've got rooms that are painted with fresco. You've got an outdoor courtyard, and then more rooms that are on the other side of the courtyard that are all part of this housing complex, of this house, this complex of this house. You've got underground water storage units. You've got bathing areas down here and mikvaot. So the houses had multiple rooms, and some of these were quite large. Now, a family wouldn't just be, a father, mother, and his children. This would be a multi-generational family, and with sisters and brothers, adult sisters and brothers and families living there together in it. These houses had mosaic floors. Now, they didn't have mosaic floors over the whole thing, but they featured mosaic floors. This is the floor that you saw in the very first picture where I told you you'd see this floor again. So here is the picture of the completed floor once it was excavated. Many of the floors are made out of just packed dirt. Other ones are made out of packed plaster. So it wasn't, they weren't just living all on dirt floors, but even the ones that were packed down, they were rolled, and so they were very, very firm. But then you've got other ones that are just with plaster on them, but then we have these mosaic floors. We also have some floors that are called opus sectillae. This is a Latin term. Opus is work, sectillae is cut. These were tiles that were cut into geometric shapes and laid into geometric patterns. This is made with black local bitumen and then pink and white limestone. They also had plastered ceilings with carved-in designs. This is stucco. Now, I do have some actual photographs of these, but it's really hard to see the designs because it's all white on white. It's much easier to see it in the design here. By the pieces of plaster that fell onto the floor, the archaeologists have been able to visualize looking up and figured out what the patterns were that were up on the ceiling of the house. They've got a lot fancier ceilings than we have in our houses. We also have walls that are made of fresco. Fresco is plaster that was painted when it was wet. The pigment then would sink into the plaster and then be preserved, as in this case, for 2,000 years. Now, this this house burned in a fire that was destroying the city, so it's got soot all over it, but you still see the bright colors and the designs of these walls even 2,000 years later. In some of the walls, we find very interesting carvings. In this particular one, I've got the actual pieces of the plaster over here, and then an artist's interpretation, what they think the whole thing looked like, is the menorah, the golden menorah that was in the temple. And someone actually carved it on his wall. Now, this appears to be the home of a priest, of a Kohen, someone who was serving there at the temple. So he would have seen this right where he worked, and he came home and he drew it into his wall. So here is his golden menorah. This piece over here, I think, is supposed to be the incense altar that was there inside the temple, and also the table of showbread, where 12 loaves of bread were constantly kept right there in the temple. So this is probably one of our best ideas of what the temple menorah actually looked like, from someone who saw it and who drew it on his living room wall. During the late Second Temple period, there was an increased importance placed on ritual purity. Hence, there were more mikvaot, or the ritual baths that people would go to, both in the homes and throughout the community. So in this house here, we have a bathtub, which is made with field stones that have been plastered over with plaster. Here's your nice bathtub. They've got a really nice floor in this bathroom. I'll have this guy come into my bathroom sometime too. And here in the same house was a mikvah. This is the ritual bath that the priest would use to cleanse himself each day before he went to work at the Temple Mount. Here is a peristyle courtyard. Now, this would have been plants and trees growing out here. Here's an outdoor sidewalk right beside the courtyard. This is the wall of the building. And inside the building, here's that room with the fancy floor that I showed you before that looks out onto this courtyard. So there would have been large windows here so that the people, while they were dining, could see out into this lovely courtyard with the beautiful gardens out there. These houses had lots of carved architectural elements. Here we have carved columns, really fancy column tops on them. These are, I don't know if these are from column tops or just from decorations along the wall. These are soffits that would have been along the top of the ceiling. Now, in my house, I have crown molding, and let me tell you, it is not nearly this big. It's about this wide along the top of a couple of my rooms. But these were huge soffits up there with carvings all over them that decorated this upper edge of the rooms. So these were really fancy houses in this area. Also in these houses, we began to find furniture. Prior to this, they thought all the furniture was made of wood, had totally disintegrated, but they began to find now stone tables. Some of them are round. It's called a Delphica table. Other ones are rectangular that stood on a pedestal. It's called monopodia. Mono is one. Pod is from pedis in Latin, which means foot. So it's a one-footed table. These were made out of local chalk stone that was available right in the area from the Mount of Olives. Also, this one here is made out of local limestone. We also have some tables that were made out of black bitumen. The bitumen is a chalk that is impregnated with petroleum products. It's quarried from down near the Dead Sea. If you take olive oil and rub it over the top of this table, the whole thing is going to look like black marble. This particular one had inlaid stones in the top of it. This design here is about 8 inches across. That was in the middle of the center of the tabletop. And the pieces that were recovered, we have red limestone and yellow limestone that are local. And this is a piece of marble that came from a Greek island off the coast of Turkey. For food preparation and kitchenware, the most typical thing that we find from this time period are terracotta cooking pots. They have a very distinctive little rim. It's kind of indented rim right along the top, so they're very easy to recognize. These pots were set right down into a fire pit, so they're always blackened on the outside. The handles are up here near the top, so when you lifted up the pot to put it onto the fire, your hands were as far away from the fire as you could get. And when you went to go take it off, that would be the coolest part of the pot, although you probably still needed some kind of a heating pad to, or a hot pot to pick it up with. These are made out of terracotta, or it's made from terra rosa, which is the red earth clay. The typical dishes, we're going to talk about 4 different kind of dishes that we found in the old city. The typical dishes, the ordinary ones, are this terracotta made from the local red clay. Bowls, cups, plates, pots, jugs, oil, little vessels for holding your olive oil. They're all made out of local clay. This is the typical thing that we find in everybody's houses. In some of the richer houses, we also find some imported red clay dishes. It's something called terra sigillata, or if you'll hear British archaeology programs, they talk about Samian ware. It's the same thing. A lot of this was made over in France or Italy and was imported here. The outside is very, very finely decorated. They were made in some kind of a mold that have all these decorations on them, or sometimes the decorations are carved into them. The outside of them are very, very, very smooth. So when you find even a small piece of this, you can tell you have the imported pottery, because when you rub it, it's just super smooth on the outside. We also have 2 kinds of stoneware dishes. We start finding these large pots, also bowls, cups, plates, basins, tables that are all made out of stone. This again was connected to the idea of ritual purity. The rabbis believed that the stone vessels did not become ritually impure, so the Jews started using these for a lot of their storage and cooking utensils, but also for their tables. Now, these large pots here, if you read the New Testament, you know about the story of Jesus and the Mary's feast at Cana, when Jesus told the servants to go fill up those water pots over there with water. This is the kind of pot he's talking about. These were the typical water pots that everybody had. They hold several gallons of water in them. But that's where you've heard about the story if you read the New Testament. Here are some more things that are made with the local chalk stone: cups, bowls, plates. This is a stopper for a pot. This basin here is large enough, probably make several days worth of bread. If it's your giant kneading bowl here to make your bread, this is about probably double the size of your laptop computer. Okay, give you an idea of the size of it. Then we have imported stone vessels. This is one that was found in the middle of the old city. It's made out of breccia di Settabasi, which is it's a marble from a Greek island. And we also have alabaster. This piece here is from Caesarea, and this is from Herodium. Both of these came out of Herod's palaces. It's just that I happen to have the pictures in my computer, and so there are good illustrations to show you this kind of alabaster. Light shines right through it. They're really, really beautiful vessels. We also start finding glassware, bowls, cups, also jugs. These we would find among the richer people out in the countryside. You would not be finding very much glassware out there, but in the city, we start finding beautiful pieces of blown and shaped glass. We also find basalt, mortars, and pestles. It's made out of basalt that comes from the northern part of Israel, up in the Golan, and this was used for grinding your wheat and barley into flour. Here is a mortar with a little pestle on it, and this one has a very interesting pestle. We found a bunch of these, and the top of it It has sort of like a handle on it, but this top is carved to look like a finger. So it's sort of like, I don't know how you do this. I can't get my finger to go that way. Anyway, it's made like your finger. This is the grinding part. The reason that they used basalt for grinding their wheat and barley, if you tried grinding on a limestone bowl, as you grind your wheat and barley, you're also going to be grinding up the limestone, and you're going to end up with very sandy flour, which is not going to be good for your teeth when you're trying to chew your bread. So they used basalt because it was very, very hard, and the basalt itself did not disintegrate into the grains as you were grinding them into flour. The oil lamps were also made out of terracotta, this red clay. This is a typical oil lamp. This is from this time period. It's generally called a Herodian oil lamp. Here's the hole where you pour your oil in, and then a wick would be laid from the center of it out through the spout, or out through the spout here. And this is where you light the fire on the wick. You can see the soot on this particular little oil lamp right here. So this is what you could carry around your house, you would have for your lighting. This particular oil lamp has 21 spouts on it, and this is from Herod's palace down in Herodium. Now that we're on the topic of olive oil, let's talk for a minute about how you make olive oil. Okay, there's a saying in archaeology: if you find a wine press, you have found a village. Find a vineyard. If you find an olive press, you have found a village. With the wine presses, they were put, these pits where they would smash the grapes was right out in the middle of the vineyard. That's because the grapes are very tender, and if you put them in a basket or in a bag and you tried carrying them back to your village, you would have grape juice dripping all over the place by the time you got back. So the grapes were pressed into juice right there in the middle of each vineyard. But for olives are very tough and hardy. You can put them in a basket or in a bag, and you can carry them for a half mile back to the village. And so there would be one communal olive press for each village. So step one for making olive oil: go pick some olives. This is your typical olive tree right here. The olive trees have a slightly bluish tinge to the green. So when you see a bunch of trees out in the distance, you can always tell olive trees because they look slightly bluer than the rest of the trees. When olives first grow on the tree, they're green. As they start to ripen, they're black. So here's a branch that has both ripe olives and unripe olives on it. When you go to harvest your olives, you want to wait until your tree is about half and half, black and green. So half are ripe and half are unripe. At this point, if you want to use your black olives to make your pickled black olives, you do that. If you want to use your green olives to make your pickled green olives, you do that. If you're going to make olive oil, it doesn't matter what color you're using. The next step is to crush the olives. You put them out on a round basin like this, and then using this big stone press, you're going to push the stick around so the stone would smash all these olives. You could either have one stone on here or two. This one shows it with two. A person could do this, or you could hook up your donkey to this and have the donkey walk around in circles all day, smashing the olives. Now, this is a standard memel over here. The crushing stone is called a memel. This one here is called an Aegean memel. It comes from one of the countries along the Aegean shore. This uses a grinding bowl that has a rounded bottom, and each of the stones is rounded. But again, you push it round and round and round, or you have your donkey push it round and round and round, and you smash up the olives. Then you take those crushed olives, you put them into flat baskets, put heavy stones on the top of it that's attached to a long rod with weights on it, and start smashing all the juice and the olive oil out of the olives. When they first put all these olives in, the stack would have been much higher. The rod would have gone way up like this, and the heavy weights would have slowly pulled down, down, down as it smashes all the juice and the olive oil out of the olives onto this round stone here. It has a little niche, what do you call it? Niche that goes around in it to a little spout. And then in the ground, you're going to have a collecting vat. Here's what the stone that's underneath all those baskets looks like. So the juice would come out, collect here, go out the little spout over here, and then go down into your collecting vessel that's buried down in the ground underneath. At that point, you can take that little pot out and you'll have water and juice in it. Separate your oil, which of course is going to float to the top. Separate your oil from the juice, and you have olive oil that's ready to use. And this could be used for cooking, for eating, for lighting your lamps, or for polishing your tabletops. Here is an olive oil press from Khirbet Makatir. This is a town about 12 miles north from Jerusalem. And I used to go help on this dig from 2009 until 2016. And this is the olive oil cave, pressing cave that we found there. Actually, a friend and I were the ones that went up here and started digging down, and we kept digging down. And once we could finally see inside, we hollered back at our supervisor, Scott, this isn't a mikveh. This is something much bigger. And once we got in there and were able to remove a lot of the dirt that was here, we found out it was an olive pressing cave. This is Lee Rittmeyer, who was our architect, who would draw all these pictures for us. So this is a diagram of what it looked like inside. There were two different types of olive presses here. First, there's one that I've showed you where you have already showed you that has used a rod that's over top of this stack of baskets. And the rod is pulled down by these giant weights. And yes, there were giant weights on the floor. They're probably about 3 feet high, 2 feet wide on each side, huge stones that were used to weigh down these baskets to press the olive juice out. Now, over on the other side of the cave, there was a later development in olive presses, which was 2 standing stones. They're curved on the inside, so they fit the shape of the baskets that are in there. And it has a screw press that is used to press the olives. So this one had remnants of both kinds of olive presses in it. We also found all kinds of pots that were sitting all along the wall. In fact, if you come down the steps here on the left and all around over here, it was full of pots that were waiting to be filled with olive oil. Now look at some personal items. We found hair combs. This particular one is from Masada, but we found plenty of pieces there and in Jerusalem, but I chose this picture because it's a complete one. You notice that the combs have very, very fine teeth on them on one side, and that's because they were for lice removal. Yes, they had a problem with lice, and so you use a very fine comb there to get the lice out of your hair. We found a lot of fibulae or toga pins. Now, a toga pin isn't just to hold a toga on, but any kind of a cloak, you want to put it around you and put a pin to hold it on to you. These, again, were found at Khirbet Makatir. The reason I'm using these pictures is because I was the one who had to publish these for that site. And so I have all these pictures in my computer, so it's very handy. I can just go into my computer and start pulling out what I need. So here's a typical toga pin. It has the pin, the pointy part of it here that goes through the cloth, has sort of a spiral spring. And then here's the hook on that side that the pin is going to hook into. Here's a little bit fancier one with the pin. Here's the spring and then the hook over here. This one is a 2-part toga pin. It had a pin that was hinged underneath that went into this little hook over here. And if this looks familiar, this is the precursor to today's safety pin. Today's safety pin has been around for 2,000 years, especially when you compare it to this one. Here's the straight pin part. Here's your spiral spring part. Here's the rod with the hook at the end on both of them. Safety pins are not new. They've been around for a long time. We also find things like tweezers and pliers. Again, these are from Makatir. We found them in Jerusalem, but these were the ones buried in my computer. This is a really neat pair of tweezers here. As you squeeze these ends together, there's a little what do you call it? A little piece of metal here that you can slide forward so that you can really grab the item and keep pressure on that item. Also a pair of pliers that we found. So they had all different kinds of implements that they were using. And we also find a lot of things that are associated with women and cosmetics. We find a lot of these little tiny pots. They're only this high. made out of that red clay. But this was, ladies, this is for you to mix up your mascara with. So you could put your the ash in there, or whatever you were using in different kind of ground stones or ground dirt colors to add the oil to mix up your mascara. These are the little implements that you could use to put your mascara on. Here's a bowl for grinding up stones, grinding up different elements of things to make your mascara and to make your cosmetics with. And this thing that over here looks like a pan, this is actually a mirror. This is a piece of bronze, and when it's highly polished, it is quite reflective. So these are different things. These happen to all come from Masada. It was a nice group picture. So I used that one. That shows you the different kind of cosmetic things they had at the time. For fun and games, we find game boards etched into the ground on the upper Cardo. This is one that is right in the middle of that Cardo area where I showed you the pictures from the Cardo. It's right in the middle of that area. It's a game that's called Nine Man's Morris, or that's what we call it today. And you play it with two different people, each one somebody having light color stones, somebody having dark color stones, and you're trying to get 3 men in a row on it. That's the object of the game, and eventually take over all your opponent's pieces. So we found one on the upper Cardo. We found one on the lithostratus, which is a big stone courtyard that's sort of towards the northwest corner of the Temple Mount. It's off of the Temple Mount, but it's in that area of the city. So we found the game boards there. We also find dice. They are very small. They're about this size because they're carved out of bone. So they have to carve it out of a piece of like a cow's bone, leg of a cow bone or something like that. When they make the dice, the 1 is opposite the 6, the 2 is opposite the 5, and the 3 is opposite the 4. So the opposite sides add up to 7. This was typical in Roman dice, and it's the way your dice are made today. You can kind of see the size of it here, very small. This is one that I found up on the Temple Mount material. It's got my name on it there. It says Frankie in Hebrew. So they're very small. When you find them, it's really surprising because they are quite tiny. But people use them for playing all different kind of games. The last topic I want to cover is burial customs. Some of you who read the New Testament are familiar with the rolling stone type of burial tomb that was used for Jesus. It says he was put into a cave and the stone was rolled closed. This particular rolling stone burial tomb is actually right beside the King David Hotel, right in the middle of Jerusalem. It is termed as King Herod's family tomb, but it is not. We know now that it's not his family tomb. It's a tomb that belonged to several families. We know that a lot of people must have been just buried straight into the ground because there are not enough burial tombs around to account for all the population of the city at that point. So we're pretty sure they were used for the richer people. This was a 2-step burial system. First, the body would be laid out on a bed inside the cave for 1 year. Like in the story of Jesus, he was put into the cave, into the tomb, and the stone was rolled closed. Normally, then you wouldn't go back there for 1 year. In the case of Jesus, the women were going to go in a couple of days later to finish anointing the body. After 1 year, you go back in there, the body has disintegrated and you only have the bones left. At that point, the bones are then put into an ossuary or a bone box. This bone box is made out of that same white chalk that those large water pots and all the cups and bowls and dishes were made out of, also all the stone tables. They also made the ossuaries out of this bone box. This is the infamous James ossuary, the one that has engraved on it, James, the brother of Jesus. They know that the ossuary itself is 2,000 years old. The question was the inscription also 2,000 years old, or was it something that was put on there much later? An ossuary has to be as long as your femur, that's your thigh bone, because that's the longest bone in your body. It has to be as wide as your pelvis, because that's the widest bone, and it has to be as tall as your skull, because that's the tallest bone in the body. So they're about this size. That's about the size of an ossuary. Later on, they went to a one-step burial system. Oh, wait a minute, go back to this first. After the bones were put into the ossuary, then the ossuary was put into a niche inside of that same cave. So the cave would have the beds on it, and then it would have these niches to put the ossuaries in. This is actually a picture of the niche cave that you access by going through the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This cave is still in there, and you can go see where the niches are. You put these caves. Later on, they switched to a one-step system where the body was put into a sarcophagus and was put into a cave like that, rather than a two-step system with putting the body out for a year and waiting for the body to disintegrate, and then just put the bones into an ossuary. Here, the entire body was put in, and this is the sarcophagus of King Herod the Great. So I hope you've enjoyed this glimpse at the lives of the people in Jerusalem from 37 BC up to about the year 70. Kind of gives you an idea of different things that they encountered during their lifetime. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, and we'll open this up to questions from anybody. If you have a question, unmute yourself and go ahead. Yes, Ivan, go ahead, unmute yourself.
I wanted to thank you for that. That was really fantastic. And just to see, I particularly like the idea of the priests, where the priests were living.
Yes.
That was fantastic. Being able to see that middle chamber with the showbread altar and the candelabra.
Yes, the fact that he actually.
Yes. Yeah, but
actually
thank you
drew
for all of it. It was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Any questions, thoughts, comments?
I'm curious. So the work in the tunneling underneath, I mean, that's
Yeah.
an impressive undertaking. Who finances that?
It is done totally by donations. It is through the City of David National Park. It is not done by, the archaeologist who's in charge is from the Antiquities Authority, but it is not Antiquities Authority or government money that is sponsoring that. It's totally done by donations that are given to the City of David National Park, to the El Odd Foundation. I worked for them the entire time that I worked there. In fact, I'm still working for them. I'm writing a paper right now that's part of a report on the step street. I just wrote the chapter on stone tables, and now I'm writing the chapter on small stone objects and on opus ectelli tiles that we found down in there. One of the things that archaeologists always thought, or people always thought, was that these rich people were living up in this upper part of the city, and that other parts of the city, especially the lower city, must have been for the poor. Or what we're finding along the step street is they're just as rich as they were up on the hill. So we haven't found a poor neighborhood in Jerusalem yet. We're not quite sure where they were, but all the places that have been excavated, we're finding the same level of wealth showing up way down here in the lower city along the step street that we found in the upper city.
I'm curious as for the tunneling, how
Yes.
far down underneath the city are you at the, or like how much space between the top of the tunnel and the bottom of the current city
Not a lot.
is there? And are you at the lowest level right now of what was built, or are there other levels below that where you are?
There are some levels below it that go back to the first temple period time. It's not very much lower. It's just like, a couple feet farther down. When you first go down these stairs to get to the tunnel, it's about 40 feet off the street level. So some places here, there's only about 20 to 30 feet, maybe even less than that at times, from the street level until the top of the tunnel where you're walking underneath. It's not that far down underneath. But you have to realize this is in a valley, and the wind that's coming from the west has been blowing dirt over into this valley for 2,000 years and has filled up the valley with all this debris. So for many years, people didn't even realize there was anything down under there, because it just looked like, fields where they had sheep and goats pasturing. And then they realized that underneath it was the whole older city. And so these excavations have been trying to uncover that. But because of the modern city above it, we can't just go in and tear down half the city to do that. You have to accommodate the people who are living there. So you're going, down underneath. But that first place where you step down, I would say about 40 feet that you have to descend. So it's like about 3 stories that you're walking down to get to the floor level there. I actually never measured it. All I know is I climb those stairs a lot. Yeah.
So Frankie, thank you very much for this. Is
You're
fascinating.
welcome.
I took my first trip there last year, this time. So I was fascinated to hear what you've said. Where the area that they're excavating underneath the houses, are those
Yes.
houses going to be able to stay there? I mean,
Oh, no, they're there. They're staying. They're not going anyplace. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I know one of the things I was just fascinated by, I think when we read the Bible, we think, oh, all the archaeology that will ever be done has been done,
Mhm.
and when I got there, I couldn't believe how all over Israel and Palestine, they're doing excavations everywhere, and they're finding
Everywhere.
new things, like you're saying. And I just wonder how the people who live in some of those homes won't be displaced.
Well, in this case, they've made the effort. They're not displacing anyone. There was no way they were going to be able to displace these people. It would have started World War III. You can't do that.
just
Okay.
so
Right.
complicated. Yeah.
So yeah, so it's being done. I said done very professionally. They brought in this Swiss tunneling company before they even started to say, can we do this? Is there a way to do this without disturbing the homes above? Now, some of the people have complained that they do have some cracks in the houses, but then again, some of their houses have been there for a long time and they had cracks in them anyway. And we do routinely have earthquakes over there.
Yeah.
Not nearly as bad as this one in Turkey and Syria last week, although Israel has usually a really bad earthquake about once every 100 years. The last one that we had in Jerusalem, the 1927 and 1937, it destroyed a lot of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They had to totally rebuild 90% of that building. So in Jerusalem, we're kind of due for another big one anytime now. The big ones will be in the 6 to 7 type category, with 6 point something, 7 point something. It can be that big. In fact, when I showed you the picture of the lower Cardo right beside the temple wall, and there were the huge stones that were still sitting there in the middle of the sidewalk, those were stones from the Western Wall that toppled in an earthquake, probably in the Byzantine period. It may have been the 363 earthquake when those toppled down. So there are huge earthquakes there. Israel's concerned because of these big ones up in Syria and Turkey. You're basically on pretty much that's the same fault line. It's farther up. It's the same fault line that goes all the way down to the Rift Valley in Africa. And that line goes right through the middle of the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, the Hula Valley, and then it goes on up into those mountains in Syria and Turkey. So, Israel's kind of concerned about what an earthquake, what would a 7.8 look like in Jerusalem. Our homes are built, they are better than the ones that are built in Turkey. They have much higher standards for building the homes there, even though they are still poured concrete. We don't have wood in Israel to build houses with, so everything's done with cinder block and poured concrete. But we have much higher building standards and higher building regulations. But still, if you got an earthquake the size of the one Turkey in the Jerusalem area, it's still going to do massive damage, but not to the extent that it did in Turkey.
Were you under any political pressure to date things to a particular thing, for the evidence of David's existence or Solomon's? So
No. What they want to find is the truth. We're not, running on anybody's agenda. We would like to find the stone that says David slept here. We haven't found it yet. But you know, we're looking at the objects, we're looking at the level that they come from, we're looking at how they're made, and we're doing our best to date them properly. And a lot of that has to do with how you carry out the dig and how you're going down level by level by level, and how you're watching what you're digging as you go. Watch the change in the color of the soil, watch the difference in the type of pottery. The pottery that I showed you, that's one of the biggest indicators of the time period that you're working with, because the dishes did change shape and sizes over time. And when you're going initially into a site and you have absolutely no idea of what time period it is, the first thing you do is look for pottery, because the pottery is going to give you the age of the settlement.
Frank and Steve, thank you so much for that presentation. Give me an idea of the life there. And I didn't know how far down the hill Pool of Siloam was, how you went down to it. Well, the question I had is that menorah on the wall. I know you mentioned it. Do you think did it symbolize the person's, did any idea of why it was there, or if it was for somebody who had that kind of, anyway?
It appears to be in the home of a priest. So
That's what I was wondering.
drawing on the wall what he saw in the temple. And so that's really one of our best indicators of what it looked like. I did a program for my synagogue on what did the Temple Mount menorah look like. And so we looked at all different kinds of depictions that have shown up different places, in buildings, on walls, on bread stamps, on coins. And we were looking at different ones, trying to figure out, you know, what was probably the best representation. And our vote at the end was the one that was drawn on the wall of that house was probably the best representation overall of what it would have looked like, because it was done by somebody who actually saw it right there.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you again for inviting me to bring some of this information to you. I hope that you found it interesting. For those of you who have been to Jerusalem, you know, you've seen some of these things. For those of you who haven't, I hope that sometime you'll eventually be able to get over there. I know Paula came over and visited while I was there, and she was really surprised at how old the city was, but how preserved so much of it still was. Yeah.
Wow, fascinating lifelong work for you. Appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. That was great.